Hi everyone, welcome to Intro to Mass Media. I'm your professor, Stephanie Marchetti. Throughout this course you can call me Stephanie, Professor Marchetti, Miss Marchetti, doesn't matter to me, I'm not fancy. And I'll be popping in with a series of these micro lessons as we progress. What a micro lesson is a video of 10 minutes or less where I explain or expand upon a concept in the textbook that relates to the chapter that you're reading this week. I have about 4 or 5 of these planned, but if you like them, let me know and I will definitely record more. Whatever is helpful to you all is what I want to be doing. So as you've seen by now, your textbook is digital and free. It's linked at the top of this course content section of the site, and it's also linked in a few other areas around Blackboard as well. You can certainly print the chapters as we go through the book if you need to, but I would recommend you try not to because it's a lot of printing. I will offer you some suggestions in a week or two once you've settled into the class on how you can read it online more effectively and some free tools we've got for you to use to work with that. So hang on for that, it's coming soon. But in the meantime, this is your Chapter 1 micro lesson. You can watch this video either before or after you read the text. It doesn't really matter. It repeats some of the information in the text and then just elaborates on it a bit. And so the concept that I'm focusing on in this video is the history and timeline of media as we know it, as it refers to the idea of Russian nesting dolls, which if you don't know, I'll put a picture up there for you so that you can see what they are. But basically, it's the idea that you start with this one little thing and then something closes in around it, and then another version of it closes in around it, and then an even bigger version of it closes in around it. And it all kind of builds and works together to form this massive picture. And that really relates well to what media is. Because realistically, media began hundreds of thousands of years ago. But our first reference to it as it almost exists today is the creation of the telegraph. And so the earliest version of the telegraph was created in 1792. But what most of you all learned about was the version that came about in the late 1830s because that's the electrical version of the telegraph. And that is the first version of media as it relates to what media looks like today. Okay, so in those 1830 time frame years where the electric telegraph was created, we were also working with the existence of daily newspapers. So many cities and towns throughout the United States had daily newspapers beginning in or around the 1830s, and those eventually transpired into what are now called penny papers. And your textbook elaborates more on what penny papers are, but basically they are the first version of gossip newspapers. They eventually inspired gossip tabloids and now gossip websites that we see today. And so that was all throughout the 1830s, like I said, and then it was all further reinforced when at the end of the 1830s, in 1839, the first photograph was taken. Okay, so after the first photograph was taken, the use and relation of newspapers kind of skyrocketed because it added another layer of media to that initial aspect of it. So we started with our teeny tiny little Russian nesting doll of the telegraph, and then we grew into daily newspapers, and then we grew into penny papers, and then closed in around that was the first photograph. And so that's the first few layers of our nesting doll. Okay, in the decades that followed, more technology became discovered and expanded upon, which led to the telephone in 1890 and the radio in 1891. And these are the earliest versions of these things, and so they didn't actually become household items until about the 1920s. And at the same time they became household-wide objects, large media companies began to form. And a lot of these companies still exist today, like NBC and CBS. Okay, so we have in the 1700s our first version of the telegraph. In the 1800s our second version of the telegraph. In the 1900s radio, newspaper, and TV began to start. And that's when all of this will become a lot more familiar to your frame of reference. Throughout the mid-40s and 50s, TVs became a household item. And then throughout the 1960s, we actually began kind of the creation and exploration of the internet. That being said, it would take a few decades before it looked anything like it does today. Okay, so if we jump forward to the more recent decades, in 2002, the first social media site launched, which was actually LinkedIn. And then it grew into things like Friendster and MySpace over the next couple of years. And in 2004, Facebook kind of took over everything with regard to social media. After Facebook came out in 2004, YouTube came out in 2005, Twitter in 2006. Then in 2010, we got Snapchat and Instagram. So we started with these physical forms of media, our telegraph, our newspaper, our radio, our television, and all those little dolls compounded on top of each other and kind of drove our hunger for media and information. And then closed in around it is the internet, which exploded our need for media and information. That's my cat. And with that, we want to think about how each of these advancements not only added to each other, but they also still existed. So as we added more and more and our doll became larger and larger, nothing really went away. It just sort of transitioned a bit, okay? So what you want to think about is how media has compounded through the years. That's what the point of this whole chapter is. So we're giving you a history lesson throughout the chapter of the creation of media, but the reality is it is helpful to know all that so that you can think about how it has all compounded. You need to see the smaller piece before you look at the whole big picture. And with media, that big picture continues to grow. So if we continue with this idea of the Russian nesting doll, we can think about how, not even really mentioned in your text, the next layer has already formed, which is streaming services. Okay, so without doing research, I'm going to say we started with about Netflix. Netflix was the first super popular streaming service. And then we got Hulu, and then just recently Disney Plus came and closed in over that because Disney owns everything at this point in time. Okay, so where this all has led us to, because technology is now so fast-paced, because media is a constant 24-hour cycle, we want to consider what section 1.3 of your book notes, and that is that information can come in many forms, but it can be sometimes difficult to separate from entertainment. So question 2 of your worksheet asks you to reflect on these concepts. It asks, how have technological shifts affected media over time? So think about that concept of nesting dolls. Think about how media has compounded onto itself over the years, and think about what is information and what is entertainment. Because those lines have become increasingly blurred as our access has increased. Okay, so consider how all of these pieces form one big thing. If you haven't read the chapter yet, that's your next step. And then when you're done with both the video and the chapter, move on to your worksheet. Your worksheet this week, because it's the first week of class, is half on the chapter and half a review of the syllabus to make sure you've read it. As it will be the case with all of your assignments, this is due by Saturday at 10 p.m. to my email address, which I will pop in at the end of this video. So thanks for watching this. Let me know if you have questions, and I'm so glad you're in the course.